This episode of Lost in Adaptation is brought to you by Audible. Calluna, we live together now. You don't have to force me to do crossovers.
Aww.
Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation and the final installment of the Hobbit trilogy. Did Peter Jackson manage to pull off a last-minute save and make an adaptation loyal to the plot and tone of the book his films are based on? No he didn't. I'm sorry, I can't even pretend. This was a hot mess.
As it's been 2 years now since we shared our thoughts on the original novel, here's a quick reminder. While Tolkien famously disliked the very concept of allegory, he certainly didn't seem to be opposed to being heavily inspired by pre-existing works. Catholic Christian influence, Norse mythology, his own personal experiences with the World Wars, some people even believe The Hobbit is a straight-up retelling of Beowulf. This isn't a criticism. Tolkien brought more than enough of his own original imaginings to the table to ever be accused of plagiarism. He just knew what he liked in other stories and included homages to them in his work.
Like I said in the first episode, The Hobbit is my first recommendation when it comes to stories to read to young humans. Do so, and I defy them not to have a vested interest in the literary world as they grow up. It's also, for reasons that will become abundantly clear before the end of this episode, essential to read The Hobbit before you read The Lord of the Rings, so if you haven't done that yet, get on that. Alternatively, you can listen to the audiobook. I'll talk more about this at the end of the video, but if you'd like to listen to The Hobbit completely for free, you can go to audible.com/thedom or text the Dom to 500. You get a free audiobook with the 30-day trial, and I have checked, you can quit anytime you want and you still get to keep the audiobook, so there is literally no catch and no commitment.
And here's our thoughts on what we saw on the big screen. Ah, the film that wasn't meant to be. The ultimate cash grab, feebly excused and justified as necessary to tell a rather simple story in an overly complex manner. Random fact, the original working title of this film was There and Back Again, like the in-universe name of Bilbo's book and the real-life alternative title of The Hobbit. I suspect it was eventually deemed inappropriate on the grounds that the there was exclusively covered in the first two films, and the back again was almost completely skipped over at the end. And the Oscar for the most over-the-top melodramatic death ever goes to Benedict Cumberbatch as Smaug.
Did they do the effects for this film in iMovie? Not all of the effects in Lord of the Rings have withstood the test of time, but they were groundbreaking when they were made. This looked like hot garbage from day one. Scenes that are supposed to be deep dramatic moments are rendered almost comical by the distracting and frankly embarrassing CGI. The fact that elves don't always obey the laws of physics is well established, but still, this is dumb. This is so dumb. Okay, I love Billy Connolly as much as the next guy, but was there really such a shortage of loud Scottish actors that they had to create a completely CGI character to work this one in? He sticks out like a sore thumb, especially when they immediately cut to the other dwarfs with him. So I can't be the only one who noticed they specifically said a wind lance was needed to fire a black arrow, but Bard has zero issues making some sort of makeshift crossbow out of a broken bow and a teenage boy. I'm also pretty sure that that bowstring should have shot forward hard enough to take Bard Jr.'s head clean off. Freeman's acting once again stole the show for me. Bilbo avoiding eye contact while Thorin talks about what would happen if he finds out that someone found the Arkenstone and didn't give it to him is fucking priceless.
There's a shocking amount of really bad edits in this film, cutting jarringly from sound to silence and back again. It's almost like they'd given up at this point. Even the redeeming feature of the last two films, the mind-bogglingly beautiful landscape porn of New Zealand, is lessened in this installment as most of the film takes place in one location and half of it is computer generated.
Okay, for the third and final time for the Hobbit films, let's talk adaptation. Smaug burning the shit out of Lake Town to punish them for helping the dwarfs reach the Lonely Mountain.
Bard killing Smaug with a black arrow, though I have to warn you, the circumstances surrounding this event are almost completely different between the book and the film, aside from the very bare bones man shoots arrow and kills dragon, but we'll come back to that.
Smaug's corpse landing on the remains of Lake Town, sinking to the bottom of the lake with it.
Thorin ordering the entrance to Erebor barricaded and then tasking everyone with searching for the Arkenstone, unaware that Bilbo already has it.
The elves of Mirkwood and their king arriving with food for the survivors of Lake Town. This book-accurate act of kindness is a bit of a problem in this film, as it seems super out of keeping with this version of Thandor's personality and his policy of only caring about his own kingdom and people.
They try to gloss over this inconsistency by having him dismiss Bard's thanks and imply he's only helping the Lakemen because it suits his needs.
The humans that were left and the elves teaming up to see what's what in Erebor, finding it fortified and garrisoned by the 13 dwarfs they had assumed had been burned alive.
Bard trying to reason with Thorin, who has none of it, refusing to give the Lakemen the gold he promised them in exchange for their help.
The practical but still totally stylish mithril armor that Thorin gives to Bilbo.
Bilbo, in an attempt to snap Thorin out of his suicidal intention of fighting an entire army, giving the Arkenstone to Bard and the Elf King so they can use it to bargain with him.
Dane, Thorin's cousin and Lord of the Iron Hills, which is one of the many colonies set up by Erebor refugees after Smaug ousted them, turning up with an army of dwarven warriors to complicate matters.
Dine.
What?
It's pronounced Dine.
It wasn't in the film. Gandalf mentioning that Dine was, if anything, harder to work with than Thorin, something that is actually proven false by the end of the story.
A massive army of orcs interrupting the impending dwarf-elf combat, forcing the two sides to join forces.
Thorin rushing out to join the fight, rallying the failing armies.
Bilbo getting knocked out and missing most of the climax.
Thorin, Fili and Kili getting tragically killed or mortally wounded in the battle, ending that particular line of Durin.
The giant eagles and Bjorn the Skinchanger arriving to support the good guys and wreck shit.
Victory for the elves, men and dwarfs, but a sad goodbye to their fallen heroes.
Bilbo deciding that taking a 14th of the treasure home, as would have been his right, was a flawed plan, so just taking a chest or two as mementos.
Coming home to find he's been pronounced dead by the Hobbit community, and arriving just as the last of his personal possessions are being auctioned off. Kind of a downer ending, really.
He gets it all back in the book, eventually. Lake Town was initially and briefly optimistic about the light from the mountain, believing it might be the forges and smelters relighting in preparation for Thorin starting up the gold industry again. It's in this part of the story that we get the only description the book provides of Bard, Dragon Slayer, and descendant of the Lord of Dale. It's very short and basically boils down to he was a bit of a sad sack with a grim face and no one liked him. Yeah, a bit of a far cry from the hero of the people of the film. As mentioned in reviews past, it's not that Bard was fleshed out into more of a character that we take issue with. It's just how derivative and generic his character ended up being. Book Bard apparently had a habit of expecting the worst out of every situation and prophesizing doom and gloom at every opportunity, so when he first suggested that the fire in the distance was more likely to be the dragon than the dwarves, he was initially dismissed as being his usual downer self. Of course, when he brought down Smaug, the people of Lake Town quickly changed their tune about him and were willing to overlook him being a gloomy pessimist, demanding he be crowned their king on the spot. However, the Master, who wasn't killed by Smaug's falling corpse, wasn't so keen on that idea.
King Bard! King Bard! King Bard! King Bard! Woo!
Hi, I was elected. A dragon doesn't automatically equal a monarchy, plus it wasn't my fault those bloody dwarfs caused all this mess. Oh, give over, they're almost certainly dragon poop by now. Shut up, Bard, if you want to be royalty so bad, why don't you go back to Dale where your granddaddy actually was lord? Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? Me going off to the great city we used to live in that's now no longer under threat of dragon attack, and right next to a now undefended, unfathomable amount of treasure. Actually, you know what? Now is no time to be bickering about who's in charge. I should go make sure the lake is still there. Bye! Haha! Good job, Master. You've mastered things again. Swinging back around to the slaying of Smaug, the film took more than a few liberties with how that went down. For starters, it's established that Smaug couldn't physically attack Lake Town because Bard had the bridge to it destroyed, and he didn't dare land on it from the air for fear that if he fell into the icy waters of the lake, he would die because, you know, fire, water, which is why he contented himself with just blasting it with fire. Bard was originally the leader of an entire battalion of brave archers who were attempting to shoot the evil bugger. Making him the only guy with the balls to try to defend his home seems a little attention-hoggy of the film. Most importantly, Smaug never even saw Bard throughout the entire event. Even a whole group of men with bows and arrows were so small and seemingly harmless to him, they were beneath his notice. Changing it so he takes the time to land in front of him and monologue dramatically as he slowly approaches instead of of just killing him as if he was some sort of classic Bond villain is beyond cheesy and cliche. While the town was utterly destroyed, 3/4 of its people survived in the book because of their speedy evacuation. I can't really get an exact count, but it looks like they took way more losses than the film, judging by the lack of pre-evacuation, the massive instantaneous destruction, and how few of them can be seen on the shore afterwards.
This film is really inconsistent about what exactly it is that's driving Thorin insane. In the book, it's referred to as gold sickness, and as the name implies, it's established that having too much gold can affect one's mental health, be you dwarf, man, or elf. The films seem to be going along with this at first, showing Thror doing a little jig in his Scrooge McDuck vault while Thorin looks on concerned in the first installment. However, by the Battle of Five Armies, things appear to have gotten a little more convoluted. Right near the start, they take the time to flash back to Smaug telling Bilbo that he's almost tempted to let him give the Arkenstone to Thorin because it would drive him mad. This is very clearly a rather obvious attempt to make the Arkenstone a copy of the Ring of Power, and suggest it in particular amongst all the treasure is what's making Thorin bonkers. However, Balin then diagnoses Thorin with dragon sickness, because gold that's been held by a dragon for a long period becomes infected with dark, corrupting magic. This is reinforced shortly later by the editing, which rather unsubtly deepens Thorin's voice and makes him sound exactly like Smaug, while he proclaims he won't part with a single piece of Erebor's gold. If it's dragon gold in particular that's the issue, what was the problem with Thror? If it's the Arkenstone that's the problem, why didn't Thorin get better when it was taken away from the mountain? Why didn't they just stick with the book and make it regular gold sickness instead of complicating matters like this?
To facilitate a joke about Alfred being a crap watchman, the film changed the fact that Bard sent word to the elves of Mirkwood asking for their help. They were admittedly already on their way, but it's why they stopped to pick up relief aid for them on the way. As alluded to before, Thranduil had no ulterior motive for helping the Lake Town survivors. He brought them life-saving supplies and delayed his approach to Erebor out of the goodness of his heart. Additional pieces of evidence that the Elf King of the book was an all-round pretty fucking nice dude include: he alone tried to avoid a battle with the dwarfs despite Bard, Thorin and Dain all pushing for it, hoping he could find a non-violent solution to the predicament. When the Battle of Five Armies started to go rather poorly for them, Bilbo decided to stick near him because he thought of all the people there, he was probably the one most worth dying for. He relinquished his part of the claim on the Arkenstone without argument, and posthumously returned Orcrist to Thorin out of respect, allowing an ancient, priceless sword of the elves to be buried with him. FYI, because Orcrist was of the same metal as Sting, in the book it too glowed when orcs and goblins were near, so for generations to come, Erebor couldn't be snuck up on because Thorin's tomb would start lighting up. It really did annoy me that Orcrist and Glandring didn't glow in the films. That wasn't supposed to be a Sting-specific power by any means, but it remains the only elf weapon to ever do so.
The Orc Army never traveled above ground or in daylight in the book, so they could take their opponents unaware. While they do eventually switch to subterranean travel, it was probably a tad pointless, as Gandalf at least knew about them already. There's a huge fundamental difference in the way the story of the Battle of Five Armies was told between the book and the film. This is how it went down originally.
The goblin armies of the mountains are upon us. We must all join forces to stand against them.
Oh hey, Hobbit guy, you're alive. Well, good news is we won. Bad news is you'd better come quick, Oakenshield is dying.
Oh, well, that sucks. Yeah, only the start of the battle is described chronologically, then it skips ahead after Bilbo is knocked out, and what happened after that is recounted to him post hoc. This allowed the filmmakers a golden opportunity to expand on the goings-on during the battle while the book narrator was unconscious, free from the burden of having to stick to the original story if they didn't want to. Unfortunately, they used this opportunity to do shit like this. There's some contestation in the Tolkien community as to exactly who the Fifth Army was in the book. Some say it was men, elves, dwarves, and the orcs and wargs counted as two, as they were technically allies but not the same people. Others that it was men, elves, dwarves, orcs, and the eagles were the last army. Others still that it was men, elves, dwarves, orcs, and Thorin and his company were the last, albeit very, very small army. The film doesn't have the same sort of issue, as wargs are portrayed as non-sapient beasts of burden, and there are clearly two separate orc armies, one that deployed from Dol Guldur under Azog, and the other from Mount Gundabad led by Balg. Oddly enough, neither of those armies are in the book. The enemy host that united the elves, men, and dwarves was a combination of the goblins from the Misty Mountains, their warg allies, and the goblins of the Grey Mountains led by Balg, come to avenge his slain father, Azog. The Misty Mountain goblins might have rallied at Mount Gundabad, but they were not an army gathered by Sauron as implied in the film, but the remnants of the Great Goblin's people, come to avenge avenge their slain king.
This is probably as good a time as any to acknowledge the slight orc-goblin issue. The word orc never actually appears in The Hobbit. When the book was originally written, or rewritten, it went through a few different versions over the years, Tolkien clearly hadn't conceived of orcs yet, or at least hadn't decided that there was a big difference between an orc and a goblin. Even in the Rings trilogy, he never definitively explains if they are a fully distinct species or if orcs are just really, really big goblins. The Rings films took a little liberty in regards to this, giving goblins, orcs, Mordor orcs, and the elite Uruk-hai distinctly different looks. Azog and Bolg were both originally referred to specifically as goblins in The Hobbit, but in the Lord of the Rings appendix, where Azog and his actions are chronicled in much greater detail, he was described as a massive pale orc. As there's no real evidence that the necromancer had an actual army to deploy in the book, only that he was gathering power, and it doesn't make any sense that Bolg the orc would be leading a predominantly goblin army. I would personally assume the most logical interpretation is that the army that attacked Erebor was made up of a combination of goblins and orcs. However, taking into account the semi-retcons and unclear definitions, it would be somewhat pedantic to claim that the film got it wrong by making the army almost exclusively orcs, so I'll just content myself with asking, how the hell did no one notice not one, but two massive orc hosts amassing this far beyond the borders of Mordor in this version of events? What, was Gondor taking a nap as they snuck past? Even with my somewhat limited understanding of medieval battle tactics, it still bothered me that the strategies employed in the book were far, far superior and effective than whatever the hell they were doing in the film, which clearly valued dramatic imagery over all else. I mean, jumping over a powerful phalanx formation to deploy archers into melee against superior numbers? Did they just hate having any possible advantage in combat?
So, an hour and 10 minutes in, this film suddenly becomes Dune.
Oh, come on!
So is there any basis for these things in Tolkien's work, or had Peter Jackson completely lost his mind at this point?
A bit of column A, a bit of column B. Bilbo at one point in The Hobbit made an offhand comment about something called the Weir worms in the Last Desert, suggesting giant worms in Middle-earth might not be impossible, but good lord, there is such a massive jump to go from that to they can be found in the Rovanian wilderlands and be utilized by orcs as high-speed drilling equipment. In the book, Thorin and his company wore clothing while standing on the walls of Erebor, then changed into battle armor when they sallied forth. In the film, they apparently decided to do it the other way around, due to behind-the-scenes issues, namely their poor design making it impractical for the actors to move around. You don't see Thorin in the build-up to him sallying forth because he'd banished the book's narrator out of his fortress, so we don't know if he had a dramatic overcoming insanity crisis moment just before the battle. No one made a big deal out of him not being there from the start. In fact, it's mentioned that everyone kind of forgot about him until he popped out. Bjorn the Skinchangers' part in the battle is really played down. Even in the extended edition, you see him arrive and attack and that's it. In the book, he turned up slightly after the Eagles. No one saw where he came from, and I kid you not, he pretty much turned the tide of battle single-handedly. Well, single giant's pawedly because he was a huge bear, but you get the idea. Dude messed them up. He was the one who broke the enemy army, and he was the one to slay their general, Bolg. I can sort of see the logic here. The filmmakers feared that a relatively minor character turning up at the last minute and saving everyone, again, wouldn't be nearly as satisfying as a showdown between two mortal enemies, both of whom had ample reason to hate one another. But the thing is, that's just what The Hobbit was like as a book. Not everything followed the traditional rules for adult dramatic storytelling.
The Eagles are coming moment in the film was a tad disappointing, where a concussed Bilbo just kind of mumbles it. It was supposed to be a mad, hysterical shout that started with Bilbo but spread throughout the entire army. When it happened in The Return of the King, where they got it right, it was supposed to be a callback to it happening in The Hobbit. Bilbo had the ring on when he was knocked out, which is why no one could find him until he woke up later and took it off. In a way that's remarkably reflective of these adaptations as a whole, Gandalf's last words to Bilbo are book accurate, but are delivered in a very different tone. The line is, "You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all." In the film, it's said to him after a brief discussion about the ring that Bilbo had tried to keep secret from Gandalf, himself and lies about having lost in the battle, and is accompanied by ominous music, foreshadowing, like so many other things, future events in the Rings trilogy. In the book, this line was a playful teasing of Bilbo for ever doubting that the quest they went on and what they achieved was the grand fulfillment of a greater destiny and more important than any one person involved, especially him, and Bilbo laughs and replies, "Thank goodness."
I think we made it clear which film original characters we approved of, which we didn't, and why last time, so let's just see what film-only shenanigans said characters got up to in this final installment. Starting with the oh-so-popular Legolas. After apparently chasing Bolg just long enough to explain why he wasn't the one to fire the black arrow, he apparently gave up and got back just in time to meet up with the Lake Town survivors, refuse his father's command to get his ass back home, and head off with Toriel to scout out Mount Gundabad place. There, he sees a second army of orcs starting to make their way to Erebor, so they hightail it back to tell Gandalf. During the battle, he commandeers an enemy bat and flies it to the top of a tower so he can fire arrows down on the enemy. Then when he runs out of arrows, he jumps down onto some sort of mutant cave troll that doesn't have any arms or legs, stabs it in the brain, uses that to somehow control it into headbutting down the tower, which is just the right size and strength to temporarily form a bridge across a chasm, providing him with a dramatic platform to fight Bolg, who, after some cool scenes, is temporarily incapacitated long enough for Legolas to notice that Thorin needs saving, so returns Orcris to him in admittedly the coolest way possible, then goes back to fighting Bolg, does the Super Mario step thing, then uses his awesome pole dancing skills to stab him in the head, and decides that this was so awesome, he's not going to risk ruining it by trying to get his dagger back. After the battle, he tells his dad he's going to wander the earth like Jules from Pulp Fiction, and Thranduil suggests starting a potential epic spin-off series with young Aragorn. Oddly enough, this is the one thing I don't think was a shameless callback to The Lord of the Rings, or at least not one made at the expense of ignoring the fact that Aragorn would have been 10 at the time of The Hobbit. Instead, I believe it is taking into account a change that was made when they were adapting The Fellowship of the Ring, where they cut out the 17 years between when Bilbo left the Shire and when Frodo followed him. Aragorn says he's 87 in The Two Towers, Rings is 60 years after The Hobbit, math. Aragorn is now 27 in this slightly altered timeline and more than old enough to form an epic spin-off series with Legolas.
Next up, Toriel, because she's worth it. Oh, come on, we were bound to make that joke eventually. She starts this film by not using her superior archer skills to help fight Smaug, but by busying herself helping Bard's family escape during the attack, an act unnecessary in the book because Bard hadn't been in prison for no reason and made sure they were long gone before Smaug arrived. After the smoke clears, Fili confesses his love for her just before Legolas turns up and oh my goodness, they are literally forming a triangle. Fuck off with this shit! She then finds out she's been banished from Mirkwood because it turns out you can't just disobey the king's direct orders and go and do your own thing for a bit with no consequences. She joins Legolas in having a gander at Mount Gundabad news and then returns to the Lonely Mountain just in time for shit to get real. She has a standoff with Thranduil as he tries to abandon the fight, which doesn't go too well for her because you don't fuck with the king with the perfect hair, but gets saved by Legolas. Despite her best efforts, she is unable to prevent the unfortunate death of her diminutive boy toy. For the most part, she is all cool and ass-kicky throughout the battle, but ultimately fails to kill Bolg and needs to be saved by Legolas again because God forbid she outstaged the original recipient of the Legolas effect. After the battle, she has her infamous "Egad, all this real love hurts so much" scene with dead Keely and Thranduil, and that's the last time you see her. We never find out if she was unbanished, if she too decided to travel the world, or if she ever went back to Mirkwood. I feel bad for saying this because I didn't hate this character, and women are already in short supply in Middle-earth, but wouldn't it have made so much more sense if she had died avenging Keely? The writers would have been relieved of the obligation to wrap up her story, Legolas would have had a non-crowbarred-in mother issues-related reason for getting invested in the fight, had a much better reason for resenting dwarfs at the start of Rings, and we all would have been spared the cringe-worthy last scene with her. Sorry, Toriel, it's nothing personal.
Alfred Lickspittle. Whose fucking idea was it to give over so much screen time to this non-book character? Seriously, he's just the worst. The actor is hamming it up like he's in an after-school special. He's unlikable, but not in a fun, love-to-hate-him way, and he's just so pointless! Nothing he does affects the plot in a meaningful way. He gets thrown off the escape boat because the full asshole makeover version of the Master valued gold more than his assistant. He's a whiny bitch to the other survivors, gets knocked over by Bard and his son, almost gets lynched by the town but saved by Bard, becomes his ass-kissing assistant and spends the rest of the movie being rude to people, dodging fighting, and generally being the least funny comic relief in the history of bad movie decisions. So much of the movie is given over to him that he got an end credit before several of the 13 dwarves of Thorin's party, most of whom had to share. I originally thought him running off at the end with a bra full of gold is supposed to be implying he's inheriting the fate of the Master from the books, who, as we mentioned, wasn't killed in Smaug's attack. Like Thorin, he falls under the sway of gold sickness when Bard secured their share of the treasure, took as much of it as he could, and fled the area, only to die a sad, lonely death far away as karmic punishment for his actions. However, it turned out, no! They just didn't think he needed a conclusion, so saved his ultimate fate for the extended edition.
Bard the Bowman. As we discussed in the last movie review, he is a book character, but he's so expanded on he might as well be new. Unlike last time, he was actually in this part of the story, so we can at least say that he did all the book-related things he was supposed to do, killing Smaug, then becoming the de facto leader of the Lake Town survivors, failing to reason with Thorin, then leading the human troops in the Battle of Five Armies. He just does a whole bunch of other things in between as well in this film. Some of them make sense and are good character expansion, others are a little silly. Lickspittle's last scene is used to show that Bard values his family above all the Golden Erebor, which is a bit of an odd moment in his arc, seeing as he's been a pretty darn committed father to them all along, so this isn't exactly a new development.
Thranduil and his fabulous hair. Again, in the books, but his personality and story arc are new and film only, and gosh darn he is given the full asshole makeover. The things he did right that they skimmed over we mentioned already, but they also added in a bunch of stuff to make him seem even worse. There's nothing in the book that suggests he tried to leave the party early and had to get a lecture in ethics from an underling, or that he had some sort of pathological need to deny that love can exist, or, according to the extended edition, that he needed to get parenting advice from Gandalf the Grey. I'm sorry, Thranduil, in making you a more realized character, they also made you a butt.
He sort of has a change of heart at the end, but without the extended edition footage where Gandalf reminds him that his late wife wouldn't want him to treat Legolas like shit. You don't have a damned idea how this happens. There's no scene of him coming around and returning to the fight. The next time you see him, he's just suddenly okay with Legolas leaving and is willing to admit that Toriel and Keely might have had something special after all. Apparently, battle being won just somehow equals realizing you are wrong to doubt the legitimacy of elf-dwarf love. Also, his elk mount is new, but it's cool enough that I doubt anyone will mind.
Azog, the already dead. To be fair, in this film Azog kind of poses and shouts a lot but doesn't actually do anything to affect the plot other than commanding his troops to attack, personally killing Philly, and fighting Thorin. It's still more than the decapitated corpse he was in the book could have done, but it's relatively inoffensive compared to how much his presence dragged the previous two films away from the original narrative. Originally, Thorin died of multiple wounds he sustained when he pushed too hard into the enemy formation and got cut off from the rest of the army. Amazingly, you can die in war without it being an epic final boss battle ending in a heroic sacrifice.
Radagast the Brown. Like Azog, this superfluous character's effect on the plot is relatively toned down in this last film. He's given the job of dragging Gandalf away from Dol Guldur while the grown-ups take care of things, then appears briefly riding one of the eagles he presumably summoned again into the final battle, then is never seen again. There's no confirmation he even survived, let alone what he did afterwards.
This film exasperated me early on by insisting on including a coming-of-age moment for Bard's son, another nothing character from the book absolutely no one cared about. If you don't believe me, name him. Tell me this character's name without looking it up. Can't do it.
So, as mentioned last time, the White Council assault on Dol Guldur to unseat the Necromancer was only very briefly mentioned by Gandalf and was basically just an excuse to get the overpowered wizard out of the story for a little bit to add tension. Who exactly was in the White Council originally is a little unclear, but my interpretation is it was the 5 wizards led by Saruman sent by the Valar, who are angel allegories moulded out of Eru, the universe creator's thoughts to counter the growing evil in Middle-earth after Melkor, aka Morgoth, the black foe of the world. I think I'm about to slip down a very slippery slope into an extended lore explanation that we don't have time for, so I'll just say I'm pretty sure the film tweaked things a bit to replace the 2 blue wizards that no one cares about with Elrond and Galadriel for a bit of fan service.
We briefly got to see Elrond in battle in the opening of Fellowship, and Gandalf and Saruman had their old man fight that basically boiled down to pushing each other over with magic and gasping a lot, but for the most part we'd been told over and over again in the Lord of the Rings books and films just how powerful and impressive these three characters were, but never actually got to see them doing any fighting. This, I believe, was Peter Jackson's attempt to alleviate the frustration caused by that. They also take the opportunity to do some rings foreshadowing by having Saruman assure the others that he will take care of Sauron himself. Yeah, no need to worry, Saruman the White is on the case. He might even use the Palantir to figure out all Sauron's weaknesses so he can really mess him up. Yay!
There's a short scene regarding an acorn that Bilbo picked up in Bjorn's garden and planned to plant in the Shire when the quest was over that's sort of meant to be a physical representation of Bilbo's value of the hearth and home over glory and gold, but they don't establish him picking it up or planting it when he gets home, so it sort of comes out of nowhere and disappears back into it when the scene is over. Legolas drops the plot twist that his mother died in Mount Gunda Bad Boy, implying the necromancer or his forces might have had a hand in it. His mother, being of the female persuasion, was obviously given no mention in Tolkien's work. We don't even know if she was dead, let alone where or how she died, and this revelation has exactly zero impact on the plot of the film. If it was true, you'd have to wonder why Sauron killing Legolas's mum never came up when he joined a fellowship to end him once and for all, but oh well. The addition of Thorin genuinely trying to kill Bilbo instead of just yelling at him and telling him to bugger off to the other side provided the film with another opportunity to have Gandalf do his cool, intimidating voice thing, though as they already played that card once, they kept it brief. Somewhat amusingly, the Ring of Power only got the briefest of mentions at the end of the story, confirming Bilbo kept its secret so he could use it to avoid unwanted house guests. It understandably gets more attention in this retconned prequel version of the story.
Would you consider just sodding off?
In the first two reviews, we tried to make a policy of not talking about the events of the extended editions and deleted scenes in any great detail, in no small part because the theatrical release of the films utterly failed to interest people enough to incline them to buy the Blu-rays, but also because until now most of the additional scenes have been out of keeping with the books anyway. However, in the case of the Battle of Five Armies, we're going to have to make an exception because massive amounts of plot-essential moments are only included in the extended editions. There's some not so important stuff like the elves and the dwarves actually killing each other before the orcs showed up, which is book accurate, though they included some bizarre spinning, elf arrow disintegrating javelins that certainly weren't in the book, but were still quite interesting.
How do you like that? The old twiddly whirlies? Haha, you buggers!
They also cut the final comeuppance for Alfred Lickspittle, something I noted the absence of originally. This is only adaptation relevant because of the sheer amount of time this wretched character leached throughout the third film. After putting so much fucking time into this stupid character, they still decided to leave his story unfinished at the last minute. It's infuriating. However, way more importantly, Thorin's funeral and Dain's coronation also didn't make the theatrical cut. Without the scene establishing that the Arkenstone was buried with him, the last time you see it is when it was disappearing back into Bard's dirty jacket just before the battle. The Arkenstone, the thing built up and up and up throughout all three movies, became an abandoned plot thread in the original cut of the film. It puzzles the mind how they thought that that was an acceptable decision. I'm also kind of shocked they didn't think who was now going to rule Erebor with all three members of the royal family dead was going to be of any interest to the theater-going audience. There's saving some extra bonus features for the DVD release, and then there's leaving your story disturbingly unfinished in the original cut, and this film sure as fuck falls into the latter category. On a final and possibly petty note regarding the extended features, why the heck did Bard's family look on the edge of tears at Thorin's funeral? He's been nothing but a dick to them, brought ruin to their town, and went back on all of his promises to them. At best, they should not have given a shit that he was dead.
Moving on to the things that were left out of any and all versions of the film. Talking birds play a large part in the book for several reasons. A very significant thrush was in fact key to bringing down Smaug. When Bilbo returned from one of his scouting missions, he mentions the weak spot on Smaug's chest where he had failed to embed enough diamonds to cover his soft underbelly. An intelligent thrush overheard this and flew to Bard just as he was about to fire his last lucky black arrow at the dragon. Bard, having special descended from king's powers, could understand the bird and took his advice to wait just a few more minutes for the moon to rise so he could aim for the spot that wasn't reflecting its light. This effectively connected Bilbo and Bard's stories and partly justified the Hobbit's part in the whole event. The film had Bard noticing Smaug's missing scale completely independently, reducing Bilbo's observation of it in the last film to unnecessary foreshadowing. The same thrush later tried to talk to the dwarves, but unable to be understood by them, he listened to Balin talk about how the ravens of the mountain used to act as messengers for the dwarves in exchange for shiny things, so he went to get one of their descendants to translate for him. The raven Thorin filled them in on the events of Lake Town that took place while they were cowering in a tunnel, in particular the dragon's death, and warned them that the men and elves would be arriving at Erebor soon. Thorin asked him to send one of his fastest relatives to Dine to call for reinforcements. The old raven hinted this was a dumb plan and advised him he should probably just share the treasure like he promised, but agreed to take the message anyway. The film does go out of its way to show ravens flying around an awful lot, and one even arrives just ahead of Dine, treated as a significant event both by Thorin and the cinematography of the film, but at no point does anyone actually confirm that they are being used to carry messages, and Thorin just vaguely states that they won't be outnumbered for much longer when questioned by Bilbo. The audience is pretty much left to form their own conclusions as to how word got to Thorin's Scottish relatives so fast.
There are a lot of plot threads left unfinished in this movie and characters that are written out without a satisfying conclusion. Like I said, you have to get the extended edition to know that Dine was crowned king under the mountain, but even then, if you didn't read the book, you wouldn't know that Gandalf turned out to be wrong about him being more unreasonable than Thorin. Possibly because of the camaraderie forged in fighting side by side, Dine chose to honor Thorin's broken promises to exchange a 14th of the treasure with the men of the lake in exchange for the Arkenstone so they could build a new home for themselves. He also gave the Elf King the white diamonds he liked so much, starting a new era of peace and good relations between the dwarfs, men, and elves in the region. He was, all in all, a much better ruler than Thorin proved himself to be in the short time he controlled Erebor. Unsurprisingly, Bard uses his 14th share of the gold to rebuild Dale and creates a prosperous kingdom for his people. Bjorn accompanies Gandalf and Bilbo most of their way home after the battle, and for some reason becomes more social afterwards, eventually becoming the ruler and protector of the wildlands outside Mirkwood, issuing in decades of relative peace and safety in the region. Thranduil, and I'm assuming his bodyguards, also travel with them as far as the edge of Mirkwood, where everyone else unanimously agreed to take the long way around the edge of the forest to the north.
You really must come and visit my kingdom again, this time as honoured guests. Are the woods still full of giant spiders? Well, yes. Hard pass.
As they parted, Bilbo gave the Elf King a necklace of silver and pearls to pay him back for all the stuff he'd stolen, which amused Thranduil no end. There's the usual Tolkien amount of songs left out of the film. Interestingly, the last one Bilbo sings as they get back to the Shire is the one that he sings as he leaves it in the Fellowship movie.
The very end of the book skips ahead quite a few years, describing how Bilbo became known as a bit of a weirdo for a hobbit, but didn't give a shit. He donated his mithril armor to a hobbit museum, I'm guessing he reclaimed it before he left for Rivendell. How he mostly used the gold he took home to buy expensive gifts for his nieces and nephews, one of whom I assume was called Frodo, and how Gandalf and Balin eventually called on him for a nice social visit, presumably sometime before Balin died horribly trying to retake Moria. I'm actually surprised they didn't foreshadow that in any way, considering they took every other opportunity to make Rings references. Perhaps they avoided it because it's legit depressing. I'm not surprised they skipped over a lot of this stuff. Tolkien was famous for dragging out his endings beyond all reason after all, but I can't help but see just how much is left unresolved at the end of 5 Armies as an overreaction to people spending the intervening 11 years mocking Return of the King for having too many endings. A final reminder that if you go by the theatrical cut, which again is the only one the majority of people watched, the following are left as unfinished plot threads. The Acorn, Dine and Erebor, Bard and the survivors of Lake Town, Radagast, Toriel, Alfred, Thorin's body, Orcrist, and the Arkenstone. The only people who get some sort of conclusion are Bilbo, the 10 remaining dwarves, Gandalf, Legolas, and Thranduil, but in his case it's not exactly clear how he got to said conclusion.
How is it possible to stretch one short book into 3 long films and still leave everything unfinished?
It's okay, it's okay. We're almost done. We just need to talk about what Jackson ripped off from his own films. I swear, each film in this series has been less subtle than the last in how it crowbars in callbacks to The Lord of the Rings that have no place in this story. At this point, it's basically just throwing shit at you and saying, hey, remember this thing?
Remember Galadriel going inverse color Super Saiyan? Remember cave trolls? Remember that big horn that Gimli blew before their last stand? Remember that hilariously impractical Morning Star the Witch King wielded? Remember the creepy underwater people? Remember how it became a running joke that Legolas had infinite arrows? Do you remember those really amazing movies? We're we're like them. Please love us as much as you love them. The Doms
And Calluna's
final thoughts.
Why the hell wasn't Bard vs. Smaug the climax of the second film instead of the pre-title sequence in this one? Then they wouldn't have needed that ridiculous action chase scene through Erebor, and there might have been time to tie up all the subplots that they put so much screen time into. This is the film I have the least patience for, partly because it's the third part of a two-part story and because it should have been a slam dunk for the book adapters. It had the large-scale battles these guys are known for and provided the most wriggle room story-wise because the narrator was unconscious for so much of it. What we got was a dragged-out, incoherent mess with missing endings. Calluna
And the Doms.
Final thoughts about this whole Hobbit trilogy.
What can we really say here that we haven't said before? The tone is all wrong and they added in so much stuff either from the appendix in The Return of the King or pulled out of Peter Jackson and the writers' collective arses. What's really frustrating is if they wanted to expand and develop the character-driven moments in the Hobbit story, they had an obvious way to do it handed to them on a silver platter. And they squandered it. Right from the start, they had 12 characters who would be present throughout the story and were effectively blank slates in the book. Thorin Oakenshield was the only dwarf in the novel with any sort of personality, and the rest were utterly interchangeable. And for the most part, they were left that way. Keely got a love triangle, Balin got some exposition to spout, and that's it. Bofa almost got to be a character because he seemed to be bonding with Bilbo a little more than the others in Unexpected Journey, but by Desolation all he does is miss the boat, and by 5 Armies, outside of the extended edition, I think he only gets like one line and that's in a group scene. Still, that's more than a lot of the others got. They didn't even do anything significant with Gloin, Gimli's dad! I recognise the irony in me saying something that's book loyal was a mistake, but if they wanted more stuff to pad the runtime, why invent or import all these superfluous hit-and-miss characters when they had so many they could have expanded on already available?
First and foremost, what you always have to remember about The Hobbit is that Tolkien wrote it for children. His children, to be precise, and because of that, a lot of the world works on child logic. A child wouldn't question things like talking animals, 13 dwarves thinking they can deal with a creature the size of a skyscraper without a plan, and a man who can become a bear and win a war single-handedly. When he wrote The Lord of the Rings 17 years later, he was writing it for adults because his kids and the rest of his audience were grown up now. Wisely, he went in the exact opposite direction, providing an explanation and a backstory for every stone and field in Middle-earth, and chronicling every year of its history since literally the beginning of time. The appendix was, in part, his effort to backdate this new tone to cover The Hobbit, and it didn't match all that well, but that was okay, because The Hobbit had come first and people didn't have to think about it while they were actually reading it. And that's ultimately what sealed the fate of these movies. They came second. The tone was set by the hyper-detailed and much more adult Lord of the Rings, and as we've said so many times now, trying to force that onto the story of The Hobbit just didn't work. If it hadn't given off such a powerful cash grab vibe, i.e. trying too hard to remind you of the better movies that came before it, and making an extra film at the last second to squeeze more ticket sales out of its audience, I might have felt sorry for these filmmakers because even if they had wanted to try and capture the original tone of the book, it would have been impossible without seeming like it's set in a completely different universe to the films that came before it. So I guess that's the moral of this story, just like in real life. You can go from childish to adult, but you can't go from being an adult to being childish. At least not without looking like an idiot. Terrence, are you okay?
Shut up! Stop telling lies! I broke up with Fanduel, not the other way around. And I don't even care, because his hair wasn't even that perfect. I'm just gonna take a little magical nap now.
Do you want to do something about this?
Not particularly. We'll save that for the extended edition.
Cool. Phew, you know, I do love Tolkien's work, but it is exhausting working for all the lore. I'm kind of relieved we're done with Middle-earth for now.
Or are we?
Yes.
Aww.
Just before we part ways, my beautiful watchers, I want to talk to you about Audible real quick. Now I know what you might be thinking, oh no, the Dom sold out. Hey, quiet you have no idea how many sponsorship deals I politely turned down before this. Audible is the exception to my no sponsorship rule because it's an app that I've been personally using for years, I genuinely like, and is super relevant to my channel. It's an online library of audiobooks that you can download to your phone, tablet, computer, or all of the above, and listen to at your leisure. You don't need to be constantly connected to the internet to listen to them once they're downloaded, so so you don't have to worry about your data. There's a legit impressive amount of audiobooks available, and the way it works is you can either just buy the audiobooks you want, or if you want, you can go to audible.com/thedom and sign up to a membership. You'll get a 30-day free trial, and you'll immediately receive a credit that can be used to buy any audiobook you want, no matter how new or expensive it is. If you choose to continue with the membership, you'll get a new credit every month, and they don't expire, so if you have a busy month and don't download anything, you can save the credit for later. As I said, I have checked thoroughly, and there is nothing stopping you from quitting any time you want. The audiobooks you purchase with the credits will be yours to keep forever. Because Audible doesn't sell anything physical that they have to manufacture, they can afford to be super chill and flexible like this. Reading a book yourself is still important, and you should keep doing that, but Audible can be an absolute godsend if you're like me and you're not that entertained by music, but you get bored very, very easily on long car journeys. Audible has also had a huge impact on my YouTube career because, in case you haven't noticed, I need to read a lot of books these days for my job, and as much as I enjoy that, it can be very time consuming. Sorry if this sounds cheesy, but Audible gave me a chance to balance doing work and actually having a life. With the audiobook playing, I can do housework, run errands, and it's not only given me a chance to start going back to the gym, it's also really great to have a good book to distract you from the pain and suffering of applying effort there. So you could say, in a way, this gun show was brought to you by Audible as well. Oh, am I doing this right? Am I sexy now? Now, you don't have to use your credit to get The Hobbit, you can get any book you want, but I will say I was really impressed with this audiobook in particular. It's unabridged, which is an absolute must, and it was narrated by an actor called Rob Inglass, who did a really good job. He's got exactly the right kind of voice for a dramatic but folksy tale like this, and oddly enough, when he's being Gandalf, I swear he actually sounds a bit like Ian McKellen, though I am willing to admit that might be my imagination. I was really pleased to see that he was the narrator for the Lord of the Rings books as well, so if you've been wanting to get through them, but found them a bit of a heavy read, this might be the solution. So yeah, go to audible.com/thedom, link in the video description, or text the Dom, all one word in caps, to 500 500 to get your free audiobook, and if you are willing to take a recommendation, have a look for The Hobbit, or if you've already read that and you want to be ready to point out all my mistakes when I eventually cover the Fellowship of the Ring, you can choose that instead. Thank you for your time, my beautiful watchers. Hello again, my beautiful watchers. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a quick reminder that there's a wonderful website called Patreon that's been allowing online producers to actually make a living doing what they do, since apparently YouTube's decided that they shouldn't anymore. Basically, they offer the chance to pledge a certain amount of money per month or per video in exchange for various rewards offered by the creator. There's a variety of stuff you can earn by becoming one of my patrons, including early access to all videos and taking part in that survey you see at the start of every Lost in Adaptation episode. That's actually a very important part of the process, as I use it to gauge how much I'm going to need to explain about the book and the film before I start comparing them. If you decide to become a higher level contributor, your name will be added to the credits that you're seeing right now, and you'll be given the option to join my private chat room so you can regularly talk with me and other patrons. If you're keen enough to join the topmost tier of patronage, you'll earn the most coveted of all the rewards, the chance to pick a future adaptation to be reviewed by yours truly. However, if right now you are thinking, "My goodness, the Dom, I can't do that! The Llama King will not allow it!
The Llama King sees all. The Llama King cannot be opposed. The Llama King is everything!"
Fear not, it would still be a huge help to me if you were to give that like button the old clickaroo, share this episode on social media with perhaps a little recommendation to your friends to check it out, and subscribe if you've not already. It really helps my channel grow and reach new beautiful watchers. I hope you have a most pleasant day, and I will see you in the next episode.